Good evening and welcome to this live stream virtual town hall with your state lawmakers, Senator Jesse Salomon, Representative Cindy Ryu, and Representative Lauren Davis. My name is Andy and I'm going to be your off-camera moderator for the evening. Tonight's event is an opportunity for you to ask your state lawmakers any questions you have about the 2021 legislative session. We sent out a survey earlier this week to the residents of the 32nd Legislative District. We have compiled those questions for you tonight, as well as questions that have come into their offices over the session. Tonight is also an opportunity for you to ask your lawmakers questions throughout the evening. So if you have questions tonight, feel free to go ahead and type them into the comments section of the live stream, and we will try to get to those as soon as we can. And with that, let's get started. I'll turn it over to the lawmakers for some brief opening remarks, starting with Senator Salomon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here and caring about how you are represented. And also want to thank my fellow delegation House members, Representative Cindy Ryu and Representative Lauren Davis, for being such awesome seatmates. I think the word that describes our relationship is constructive. I think we are working well together. I'm happy to report to achieve results for the 32nd district, and that's really important. This legislative session has undoubtedly brought unprecedented challenges, both in terms of the needs of our constituents and the challenging virtual session. How we're going to actually get bills passed was the big question. And I want to say this was a resounding success. We passed during this last floor voting session more bills than any of us really ever imagined going into this. The technology and staff help has been nothing short of amazing, and I really want to thank our staff. First, I want to say with COVID relief, we have over $2 billion in federal funding that we're directing to the people of Washington State. Also, over $200 million in state funding. We've increased the minimum unemployment benefit. We have lots of people that are in need right now, and understandably so, but we've also smoothed out the hit to small businesses and other businesses who pay into the pool to fund unemployment insurance. So they will not be getting a big hit next year or the year after, and it's going to be smoothed out over the long term to make sure they also can get back on their feet. We have hundreds of millions of dollars for struggling renters because we have to prevent a wave of evictions post-COVID for renters that get left behind. So we need to make the landlords whole, right? I think we need to pay, help make sure the landlords don't lose out, but also make sure that struggling tenants are doing okay. Just want to highlight a couple of my bills that have to do with COVID. Right now, I'm expecting a lot of people will be struggling for the short term and may not be able to pay their traffic tickets if they get any. Currently, we have about 100,000 people who are suspended for non-payment of traffic tickets. And if they drive to work, for example, when they're suspended, they can be criminally liable and sent to jail. And so I'm aiming to change that so that as long as you do respond to your ticket and you tell the judge, look, I'm having a hard time, you get on a payment plan and it will all be civil from there. As long as you respond, you will not be criminalized for doing what you need to do. That bill is, I'm proud to say, sent over to the House. All Democrats and a number of Republicans voted for it. And lastly, I heard from members of our district that some folks early on in the pandemic were not allowed to wear personal protective equipment because their bosses, both in the medical field and in supermarkets, said that it scares customers, which I thought was an insane response to the pandemic. So my bill says that if employers are not providing personal protective equipment during a pandemic, that an employee can bring that in and wear it to protect themselves and others without fear of retaliation. There's a lot more going on. We're not going to cover all of it. I'm going to stop there and give a chance for other folks to speak. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Solomon. Definitely, the relationship we have is very constructive. And I would also like to add, we definitely have a great partnership going on among the three of us. So it's really a pleasure to be serving in the legislature with you. So I'm Cindy Ryu, a state representative in position 1, and I am serving the 6th term. Who knew I'd be around this long? But I am definitely enjoying this year, even though it's quite challenging because we're mostly on Zoom as well as Microsoft Teams. And I am fortunately very happy to be chairing the Community and Economic Development Committee this year, as well as serving on Consumer Protection and Business Committee and Appropriations Committee. The significance of the Community and Economic Development Committee and the timing of it is that this year we have identified a lot of needs, especially highlighted through the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of it is how dependent we are on broadband. And so these are not my bills, but we have at least 2 bills that I'm very interested in. One is House Bill 1336 from Representative Drew Hansen. It's about broadband and public utilities being able to offer them and retail authority. And then at the other side is Senate Bill 5383, which our good senator has supported and voted for, and I hope to be able to do that as well. It is smack dab in the middle of my committee work right now, and they do have some conflicts policy-wise and timeline-wise. And so I am leading a team on trying to make sure that both the retail authority eventually for the utilities and cities, as well as the nitty-gritty stuff that we need to do right now to make sure that we are coordinating and centralizing how we pass all the various funding at the local and state and hopefully federal level through our one office, so we're not working in silos and at odds with each other. So these are exciting times, and I look forward to the conversation we have coming up in the next hour, a little bit less than an hour that we have.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. I am the junior seatmate to these two wonderful people. Actually, Senator Solomon and I technically came in at the same time, but it's an honor to serve with them, and want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. So I think my two seatmates did an awesome job kind of giving the overlay of the session. The committees that I'm serving on this year, 2 are consistent with my first term and 1 is new for me. So I'm continuing on the healthcare committee. So lots of certainly work around COVID response, but also other pieces of our healthcare system and hospital systems. I serve on the public safety committee, which I would say in my first term, we spent a small minority of our time working on law enforcement issues and most of our time working on issues related to jails and prisons. And that's definitely flipped. We have spent most of our time working on much needed and long overdue police reform this year. And then the third committee I serve on is civil rights and judiciary. So that's a really broad catch-all committee. That's everything from civil law matters, family law, to things like data privacy, which is a new area of work for me. I continue to work very heavily in our behavioral health system, so mental health and substance use services, including our youth who are really struggled profoundly with mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, suicidality, exacerbated by the pandemic. And so I spent my interim working in close concert with the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group and leading one of their committees. So doing a lot of work in that space, also doing a lot of work on kind of the overlap of the criminal legal system and the behavioral health system, spending a lot of my time lately on the Blake decision. For anyone who's not familiar, that was the decision that Supreme Court for our state essentially threw out our felony possession statute. And so there's a lot of work to rethink how we respond to individuals with substance use disorder. So really involved in that. And one bill that I'll mention that I'm really excited about that I spent a lot of my interim working on and I'm heavily involved in this year has to do with the 988 system, but specifically the idea is to create a behavioral health emergency line that people can call for suicide crises, mental health crises, substance use crises, instead of sending uniformed law enforcement, actually send folks who are trained to respond to those sorts of situations and actually make sure they get connected to care and that follow-up actually occurs. So really really excited to hear folks' questions tonight, and thanks again for being here.
Excellent. Thank you for those opening remarks. Again, just a reminder, if you tuned in a little bit late tonight, this is a live virtual town hall with your state lawmakers from the 32nd District. So if you've got a question for them tonight, go ahead and put those questions in the chat box in your live stream, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. First question we have is about schools and vaccines. What's the status of getting kids back into the classroom, and when will all teachers be vaccinated?
Maybe I can take that. As a former microbiology major, I am for vaccinations. So if you have access to vaccines and you're qualified to get them, please do get vaccinated. And of course, even after you're vaccinated, please continue to social distance and continue to wear your masks, because I think we just absolutely don't know what the implications long-term are from COVID-19, whether you're vaccinated or not. So I would be on the cautious side of continuing to be staying safe, protecting yourself and your family and the community members. So the governor has asked that the schools open as soon as possible, but it's up to the parents whether they feel safe about their children going back to school for in-person instruction. So for the teachers' safety, obviously they need to be vaccinated as soon as possible. So I am hoping that as soon as there are enough doses to vaccinate them, that they will have access, especially in the North End, where we are finding it is much harder to I call it scoring a appointment, or getting an appointment to get your first or second or maybe even the single dose. It is definitely a challenge, but I'm hoping that the teachers are getting vaccinated before they do return.
Sure, and I can just add, so we don't have certainly a specific date, but I think our state has done a really admirable job in terms of ramping up response. We had a goal to administer 45,000 vaccines per day, and we've actually reached that goal and have given out some 2 million vaccines to this point. The one thing I did want to mention kind of on the topic of vaccines, although this wasn't the specific question, is anyone who is struggling, we do have on the Department of Health website, they've got a phase finder, and they've also got a vaccine locator tool. So I do want to encourage folks to utilize that and to access that. It can be frustrating because I know to Rep. Ryu's point, it's easier to find in certain areas than others, but please check back frequently because we certainly want to get everyone vaccinated as soon as possible, everyone who's willing.
And I'll just say, I know that some people have heard messaging around vaccines not being safe. My family and I, as soon as we're legally able, are going to get our vaccine. I do believe they are safe, and the sooner we all get it, the better we are. The reason why it's not really advisable, not so great to not get the vaccine, even if you, let's say, don't care what happens to you with COVID, don't want to get the vaccine, is the vaccine is not 100% effective. So if the Johnson & Johnson is about 95%, so there's still a 5% chance that a vaccinated person can get it. The more people that are vaccinated, the less hosts the virus has to spread to, and so you're still protecting everybody else. So this is really a group effort, and I think we all need to think of ourselves as in the fight together to stop this virus. We can't just sort of take ourselves out and say, well, we're separate and apart, because we all live together in this society and we interface with each other.
All right, excellent. Next, we are going to go out to Camille submitted a question through the SurveyMonkey form about police reform, and Senate Bill 5134, which is crucial to police reform, is unfortunately dead this session. What are your plans for the bill next year, and how can advocates help support the bill?
Well, first, I really want to thank you for that question. Sometimes I wonder if people are paying attention to what we're trying to do, and it sounds like the answer is yes. I want to point out before I answer that there are a tremendous number of very worthy police reform bills that are still alive. So while I am personally disappointed that the police accountability bill died, we have great bills like duty to intervene, like the officers in the George Floyd killing who weren't sitting on George Floyd under this bill by law have to stop that other officer from doing that. And any host of accountability measures, which we could talk about later. My bill deals with what happens after an officer is disciplined. They have a system that most of us don't have access to, that's designed in part to question the judgment of a police chief or sheriff who imposes discipline, where the police union and the management will pay for a private attorney to sit in judgment of the discipline that was imposed, who has the power to overturn that discipline and, for example, reinstate terminated, fired officers to their job. This happens in about 50% of appealed cases nationwide. There was an African-American woman who was handcuffed, and she did kick an officer, not in, like, there's no serious physical danger. It was not a good idea, but that officer reacted by punching her and breaking her eye socket. He was terminated and then reinstated through the arbitration process. That's just to demonstrate the downside of it. The reason why this happens through the collective bargaining agreements that the police unions have or leverage with the local governments that dictates this process of discipline. So my bill would say that, yes, absolutely, I'm a big supporter of unions. I have it would just say the traditional things like wages and hours and working conditions, bargain away, just like we always do in all our unions. But when it comes to the disciplinary process, that's not part of collective bargaining, and we're going to set it out in state law that way. That bill predictably was opposed by most of the unions that weighed in, although there was some support. And so unfortunately, maybe it was a little too progressive. It didn't get out of committee, but we're going to keep trying to build support, working with the ACLU on that. And unfortunately, I believe we're going to keep seeing these incidences of injustice and discipline being overturned. So the issue is not going to go away. We're going to pass a lot of these police accountability bills this year, and hopefully in a way sort of clear the table so that we can then shine a spotlight on this arbitration system.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that answer. Next, we are going to go out to a question that came in via YouTube from Mike. He's got a question on what the latest is on the capital gains tax in the Senate, and has it passed the Senate, and when does it go to the House?
Yes, the bill has passed the Senate, and so we will be considering it. And as I used to serve on Finance Committee, where we actually did consider a capital gains tax bill quite a few years ago. So it's an idea that's been around for quite a while, and obviously is part of tax reform that we must consider this year and going forward for quite a few years. And what I've seen so far is quite promising. It is it is at the rate of 7%, as the good senator voted for it, 7%. It does give a $250,000 per year exemption on the capital gains tax on sale of that asset that had gained that amount. And so I think that is going to exempt most people from having to pay the tax. So it will, I think, somewhat help us equalize our upside down tax code. And obviously, people are worried, especially for people who own businesses, that right now the exemption is at $10 million of if their gross is under $10 million a year, then they are exempt, even if they were using their business asset as their retirement fund, I guess, is what you could consider a family business. They worked on it for years, and now they're ready to retire. So what happens if they sell it and hopefully they have realized some capital gains? Well, if their income or gross income was less than 10 million per year, they're totally exempt. So that really helps out. I think we estimate about 95% of businesses in Washington state gross less than 10 million per year. So even though it might not guarantee that the other than that 5% or so that they would be exempt, the intention is that most, if not all, of their sale of their business would be exempt. And it was very well thought out. I thought Senator Solomon voted for a really good bill. And as I mentioned, at 7%, it's much lower than the 9% that was being floated around. And it exempts, besides the $250,000 per year per filer, also exempts the businesses and many other assets such as real estate. And so I think it won't matter to most of us, and yet it will go a long ways toward making sure that we have some revenue to make sure that we fund really laudable programs that I know a lot of us want to make sure that we continue funding.
And I'll just add real quickly, and thanks, Rep. Reeve, for the great and thorough response. A couple things I wanted to add. I mean, I think a lot of folks may worry, oh, is this going to affect me? But the truth is it affects about 9,000 taxpayers in the state of Washington and about 7.5 million people. And so it's a tiny fraction of folks. We in the House Democratic Caucus are very excited about this. We've actually had the votes on the House side for quite a while. And so it's so meaningful and exciting for us to have the bill move through the Senate, because again, we're just excited to move it along. It was actually heard this morning in the House Finance Committee. And I just wanted to mention that one of the prominent uses of those monies, which will be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $500 million a year, is early learning and childcare, which is something we've heard from our constituents in the 32nd, but our colleagues have also heard from constituents across the state about the need for high quality and accessible and affordable childcare and early learning. So really, as a former Head Start preschool teacher myself, I'm really particularly excited about that going forward.
Thank you. And I want to say, since this policy is such a big deal, I also want to explain why I voted for it and support it. I am not anti-wealth. I believe in thoughtfully regulated capitalism. That is my preferred economic system. That is what I support. I wouldn't have had to say that 10 years ago, but these days, I guess it's called into question who supports what system. But if anything, the last year or so has brought into stark relief the disparities and the disadvantages that many people have when it comes to wealth. We know that the top earners pay about 3% of their income in taxes in Washington state, and the bottom earners pay about 17%. And that matters most when you're struggling, that 17%. We know that women have been largely affected by the school closures in terms of having to take up the slack, in terms of having to take kids out of childcare and having to leave their jobs and deferring their dreams of their careers. So what I found to be really important is that this money is targeted, the first $350 million per year, at childcare access for those who are not quite able to afford it, but also expanding the quality of childcare, because there's really nothing better that we can do to prepare our children for the future than investing in high quality early childcare and early learning. And I'm proud to say we're doing that, all the while diversifying the tax code. I suppose I could go on, and I'm happy to answer any further questions about that offline, but I think it's a really exciting policy, and it's called for.
All right, thank you, Mike, for that question. Next, we have a housing question. Mallory submitted this question, specifically about rental housing. Will you support stronger protections for the 32nd district renters by voting yes on House Bill 1236?
Yeah, we both voted for 1236 that moved out of the House and is now in the Senate. And I believe it is very well balanced. It's obviously to protect renters. Alternative title for this might be a good cause evictions bill, right? We do have no cause eviction right now. And the problem is that we are facing, especially as we exit out of this eviction moratorium that's been in place for quite a few months, almost a year now, that we have to make sure the tenants are protected. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that we are balancing the interests of landlords, as well as, of course, interests of neighbors and interests of applicants seeking housing. And so I believe House Bill 1236 struck all of those balances really well, and especially in the context of us working so hard with several different bills in addition to this particular bill. We have been pushing out rental assistance, of course, to the tenants, but also a lot more out directly to the landlords, because we do want the landlords to have want to stay in that business and continue to offer their units for rent, because we will not have tenants unless we have landlords. And so we are working on almost $500 million worth of assistance directly to landlords, on top of what the tenants have been, a little bit of what the tenants have been receiving. So I thought it was a really good balance of all the assistance we're providing to the tenants, to the landlords, that this additional protection was so well balanced, and it does allow, I think people will be asking, hey, how about us who have not been able to get rid of tenants that have not been behaving well, especially once the eviction moratorium is over? How do we deal with that? So we're working, and we have been hearing all those concerns and complaints. And so I believe we have so many bills and legislators working so hard on them that we will, in sum, come up with really well-balanced policy.
I'm on the committee that is hearing these bills right now, the Senate Housing and Local Government Committee. I think there's nothing that keeps me up more at night, nothing that worries me more than to try and find the answer to the question of what is the right balance between tenant protections and landlord rights, if you will. We obviously need to prevent a wave of thousands of homeless people after the moratorium is lifted on evictions. If it's based on them losing their jobs because of COVID and the protections that we put in place in COVID and the restrictions, we cannot let those people go out on the street. The good news is we have many hundreds of millions of dollars to address some of the back rent issues with the moratorium. That being said, there are also these bills to give them rights so that they're not moved out of their tenancy in exchange, so that landlords can get tenants who they think have better economic prospects. So that's the reason for some of these bills, these restrictions. What we can't do, however, is discourage landlords so much with the regulations that they get out of the business of renting, sell to owner-occupied buyers in this really hot market, real estate market, and then have a reduction in the amount of rental housing, which would lead to a increase in cost in rentals over time. And I think that's a real fear. We cannot, as a government, create, fund sufficient affordable housing to keep up with the needs right now. even with the capital gains tax, right? I mean, we would have to raise taxes, much higher. Housing is very expensive. We just can't buy our way out of that problem. We have a role in some of the most affordable needs housing. The private market still has to be strong. So trying to find that right balance is key, and it's hard to do. And I hope, and I think we're doing the right thing. I do plan on voting this bill out of committee. All of the stakeholders decide that to keep the bill moving.
All right, so the next question we have is from Sean, submitted a comment on Facebook. Sean says, what do you see as the most important policy change you could pass that would support working families?
Great question, Sean. Thank you. Gosh, I feel like we're doing a lot for working families, but probably what we're maybe most excited about, and it has working families in the title, is the working families tax credit that the House passed off the House floor in what was really emotional in the most wonderful and joyful of ways moment, where it's really an effort to rebalance our tax code so that we're putting money back in the pockets of our working families. And when you heard my wonderful seatmates talk about the capital gains tax, which is really a tax on wealth, and the working families tax credit is really putting, again, that money back so people can then reinvest that money in their local grocery store or their local restaurant or their kids' soccer league. And I also think some of the childcare work we are doing will also really be a boon to working families as well.
Representative Ryu, do you want to answer that before I jump in? So I just want to answer that with a bill that I'm working on. So sometimes helping, dozens or hundreds of working families directly is also furthering this goal. I have a bill that passed the Senate that is now being heard in the House that says that on our ports, that our longshore workers, our dock workers, longshore women, longshore men in the unions won't lose their jobs because of automation. Under this bill, ports cannot fully use money to fully automate their operations. They can use new machinery, but they can't write human beings out of the picture. And I think that strikes a fair balance.
I agree that the working families tax credit is going to make the most difference for each of the families. If I were to bring up another policy bill, it might be the KETAM bill, which is over in the Senate now, House Bill 1076. I know it is very controversial, but I believe it's been worked quite well. It is the Worker Protection Act, so that employees who might not be able to highlight or bring up, for instance, not getting paid or their hours not being counted properly, that they could have an additional avenue. And I know the businesses have been very much against this bill, but I think what it does is it protects actually not just the workers, but also the good actors. So if employer is a good actor, they have absolutely nothing to worry about. But if the employer is not obeying, going according to all the laws that they are supposed to work by, then it's just another avenue for the worker to protect their rights. So that would be my number one policy bill.
All right, thank you for that question. Next, I'm going to switch gears a little bit to a democracy question. This one was submitted by a couple different people. Sarah and Kyle submitted a question about ranked choice voting. Sarah specifically said, I was disappointed to see that substitute House Bill 1156 not make it past cutoff. What can we do to ensure communities that want to use ranked choice voting have access to the tools they need? That got cut off there a little bit at the end, but That was Sarah's question.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Sarah, for the question. Oh, you can go ahead, Representative.
all right. So during last year, what we call camping season, I was asked about ranked choice voting, and I supported it. And unfortunately, it was so complicated that it did not make it through the House this year. So there was a much more simple version or amendment introduced, but it was by then too late. Representative Davis?
Thank you, Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think so. That bill made it all the way to the House floor calendar this year, and I do think which was much further than it has historically, and I do think there's a lot of support, including from myself, but yeah, there was not clearly not enough votes even in our own House Democratic Caucus to move that policy. And there was a lot of concern from some of our colleagues who represent Pierce County, because Pierce County evidently had done ranked choice voting, and that experiment didn't go over super well. And so to the question around, kind of what people do, I think engaging lawmakers from Pierce County, engaging constituent advocates who care about ranked choice voting from Pierce County, and helping them think through the ways that maybe the failed experiment are different than what is being currently proposed, and how to solve for some of the real concerns that they have that arose out of their past history with ranked choice voting in the South Sound.
All right, great question. Next, we are going to go to Phyllis submitted a question. This is a higher ed question. With the importance of educating a new workforce to help our economy, will you support no cuts to higher education, especially in the community and technical colleges?
I can speak to that. So my father was, and still to some extent is, although he's retired, a professor at University of Washington. And my mother was also a professor when she was alive. So obviously I've grown up in a household that values higher education. While I'm not comfortable saying that when we lay all the budget cards out on the table, I will protect this piece at the expense of this piece without seeing all the moving parts, I will say that I am strongly in favor of higher education. Specifically, during our caucus meeting on Senator Marco Lias's bill on supporting higher education, I advocated for it and helped make sure that we move I was hoping for more, but 200 community college faculty who have been strung along on part-time jobs to be given the respect that they deserve and to be made full-time employees and be put on a tenure track position. They have been suffering in this system partly because of underfunding from the legislature side, or largely because of that, and we need to change that. And so I am supporting that commitment.
Excellent. All right. Next question we have is about universal health care. This came from Ryan, who is watching us on YouTube. Ryan wants to know if you support Senate Bill 5204, establishing a statewide universal health care system. As your constituent, this is my most important issue. I'm not entirely sure if that's the right bill number, because I looked it up and that didn't look like the correct one. I'll see if I can find that for you. But are you familiar with the universal health care bill that's going through the legislature this year?
Yes, I'm happy to start with that as your friendly healthcare committee member. So I enthusiastically support universal healthcare. I do think it is a pretty complex and thorny issue for a state to tackle. And the reason that there has not been traction in the way that supporters of single payer might have liked is because it's significantly more complicated for a state to achieve. And Vermont figured this out without significant help and changes at the federal level. So we would need changes at the federal level to allow for healthcare coverage beyond the current limits, for example, on Medicaid and Medicare, which are dependent based on age and based on income level. We would also need a significant amount of funding from the federal government. But until there's some changes congressionally, we will not see a state be able to actually implement a true single payer in the way that folks, including myself, would like to see and support. We really need help from Congress in order to be able to achieve that.
I can say, as a former Medicaid intake officer at University Hospital from how many decades ago, that I knew that medical insurance or coverage, and especially single payer system, would be much needed and also much more efficient for our system. For instance, we can take a look at many of the European countries or even South Korea, where once they institute those single payer universal care system, the entire population benefits by better quality of life, longevity, and the stress that's taken off of families' shoulders. And so that's why I've supported expansion of our Medicaid system, as well as, of course, about a decade ago, us adopting I think in those days we called it Obamacare, but Affordable Care Act. And so I think I definitely support a single payer system. And obviously, as Representative Davis pointed out, quite a complex system that we have right now. So absolutely, we have to keep working on it, but I do support it.
You know, we have some of the most expensive healthcare, and it's been said that we get the worst outcomes. I don't know if I believe that. I think there is really good healthcare available if you're lucky enough to qualify either through a program or through the Affordable Care Act or through your own employer insurance. But I do think we can improve upon it. I supported, I believe I voted for Senator Randall's Universal Healthcare Commission, essentially a study bill, 5399, and I've supported Cascade Care, expansion of Medicaid coverage with a public option that Senator Frocht has been working so diligently on. I'm not, being of the more conservative body, the Senate, I'm always cautious to rush into big systemic changes. I want to make sure that we sort of try it out and make sure it's working and then take the next step. I do not believe I'm an incrementalist, but I also maybe I'm somewhere in between that and just a tear down the system, build a new one kind of guy. So in concept, I do support universal health care. I want to make sure and see that it works before we get there. And I do think that we have a system that works well for a lot of people, but not enough people.
Great. Thank you for those responses. Just for the record, I'll apologize to Ryan. He had the right bill number, so I typed that in incorrectly, but that was Senate Bill 5204 if folks are interested in that. Next, we will go to switching gears a little bit to a topic that I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about today, the issue of daylight savings time. So Dan had submitted that question and wanted to know what the status of that is in Washington State.
I can jump in. Yes, the good old hashtag ditch the switch movement. So that was a bill that we actually passed, sponsored by my wonderful House colleague, Marcus Riccelli from Spokane. And, you know, Rep. Riccelli serves on the healthcare committee with me, and there are actually a whole host of negative health impacts that we can measure related, including things like, you know, heart attacks and strokes that are intensified and associated with what happens to the body clock with that change, and also certainly the benefits of having sunlight later in the day. So we did pass that here, and there's some 14 other states that have passed similar legislation. But here's the catch: Congress actually currently has a prohibition on permanent daylight savings time. And so until Congress acts, our bill that passed is not in effect. There has been kind of one significant development, which is that our own Senator Maria Cantwell now chairs the committee in Congress, in the Senate, that this Senator Rubio. It's a bipartisan. It's called the Sunshine Protection Act, but that bill will now go to Senator Cantwell's committee. So we'll see if we can't get that through Congress, which would then cause the Reparcelli Permanent Daylight Savings Time bill that the legislature passed to go into effect.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that. Next, we had a question submitted through SurveyMonkey from Stephanie. Wants to know, what is the action you've taken recently to support the values and the priorities of your more conservative constituents?
I could take a crack at that. I actually grew up in rural Thurston County, and then I went to high school in Lewis County. And so I was steeped in conservatism, and they continue to be very conservative. And I also attended a church that was very conservative. So I used to wear, in those days, we wore long dresses. So my view of conservative constituents are people who ask me to be fiscally responsible, people who ask me to be very thoughtful as I'm considering bills, brilliant ideas that my colleagues come up with. And perhaps is my background in microbiology, as well as an MBA in operations management. I actually do think policies through as to whether they're sustainable, are they efficient ways of implementing them, and will they work? And so I think just my approach to bills, as well as the committees that I serve on, including Consumer Protection and Business Committee, where we deal with, of course, consumer protection, but also business licensing, and to make sure that we pass bills or change policies that make things work much more efficiently, and that we conserve our resources, I believe is my tribute to my conservative background. And as a wife of a ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, you can imagine what my church members, as well as my belief, my religion dictates that I do, which is, of course, take care of people and take care of the earth, because God entrusted both my fellow human beings as well as the earth to us. And so that is my way of serving my conservative constituents.
I can go next. So, I mean, I certainly think that I want to believe that government efficiency is sort of a universal value, but I do think government finding particular efficiencies and places of, cost savings or more efficacious use of our state's limited resources is certainly appealing to folks who might identify as a fiscal conservative. And so, I mean, a couple things that I can highlight, I've actually kind of made it my mission the last couple years. So I serve on the healthcare committee, so I have a really rich understanding of health insurance billing and Medicaid billing, but I've made it my mission to comb through the state budget and find all these places in other programs. So like the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or the Department of Corrections, places where we are providing services that actually could and should be billable to the state's Medicaid system, which is mostly funded by the federal government. So it's less of our own general fund state dollars and more Medicaid dollars, where we are not billing Medicaid because maybe no one had connected the dots because it's in a different agency that's not the Medicaid agency. So I submitted 3 budget provisos just this session about that, about actually turning down the general fund state and turning up the Medicaid billing. So we're being more efficient with the resources that we have. I've working with my colleague, Senator Elias, on a bill related to efficiency of use for naloxone, which is an overdose reversal medication, but the billing mechanism, we were using flexible state dollars for something that we, again, should have been billing Medicaid for. And the last one that I'll mention is I have also gotten into looking at contracts. And so specifically, I've got a bill that has to do with the obligations of our state's Medicaid managed care organizations to provide what they contract with the healthcare authority to provide care. And it turns out they have all sorts of obligations associated with care coordination for individuals who are in custody, individuals who are incarcerated. And for the most part, those obligations were not being met. And so these entities were supposed to be doing reentry planning, and they were not. And so I am making it my mission to ensure that that does happen, and in fact, those contracts are followed, and those monies that they're receiving for those services are in fact acted on.
And I would say, looking to some of the small business relief that I alluded to earlier, making sure that landlords aren't overregulated and making sure that they get paid the back rent are a couple of things. But look, we are not, unfortunately, I guess, living in an era of bipartisanship, right? We are not fighting a lot of sort of Dan Evans type Republicans who do believe that government can help people, that there is a role in the public sector, but want to buckle down and make sure all those dollars are spent efficiently and effectively. Although I do think we do a fairly good job through JLARC, and it's a body to review our spending. But I'm kind of sad, like in local government, I worked with some of those moderate Republicans to really drill down on fiscal issues. And I'm sad that that's missing in the legislature. That being said, while I believe that it's not a great idea to water down a policy proposal in exchange for bipartisanship, I have found that building relationships and keeping communication open has earned support for some of my bills, like the personal protective equipment bill, the ports cargo bill to save family wage jobs, and the driver's license suspension bill. And more importantly, we have to learn not to fight each other. Like, we cannot slip into a place where we hate each other. We need to keep building bridges. And so within my caucus, when things get heated, when feelings get hurt because of perceived insensitive comments from the other side, I do speak up and say, look, they don't like what we're doing. We're passing these bills, and we should be, but let's be sensitive to their deeply held beliefs and understand that they're upset, and let's not get in this cycle of hating each other. And let's continue to have our differences of opinion, but recognize that we are one people in one Washington.
Excellent. Thank you for those responses there. We got time for just a few more questions. So we'll get to another submitted question here. This one was from Barbara. This is an interesting question. Now that 45, I think she's referring to President Trump, former President Trump, is gone, and the Biden team use Twitter appropriately to communicate with the public, when will each of you begin to use Twitter as a means of communicating?
I can start as your resident millennial. I am not the best millennial, actually. I am not a big Twitterer, if that is a noun. I do have it. So interestingly, there's lots of rules, right? Ethics rules around social media in the legislature. And we have formal, just now, like, even though Facebook's been around since I was in college, now this year we're allowed to have official legislative Facebook pages, big development. But we do not have official legislative Twitter pages, and I haven't heard chatter about that. But we do kind of have individual ones that are kind of unofficial. And I tweet, we kind of have big tweeting days, hashtag AskWaLeg type days, but I have not. I could and should probably, I'll take that as a call to action to be better about using Twitter with more regularity.
I am not a millennial. However, I do have a Twitter account, but I do not tweet that often. So as Representative Davis said, our Facebook is official, but also we have limitations on when we can post and when what we cannot post. So on my Facebook, I typically use my personal to post my personal feelings. And so you might see me on Facebook a lot more often than you would see me on Twitter. But you need to remember that we have public records as well as other ethics issues that we must make sure that we are able to capture the official Twitter, if we ever do that, or definitely the Facebook. And so fortunately, Washington State does have very strong public records and public meetings acts. And so we are trying to stay within those very narrow and highly regulated lanes, and yet at the same time trying to stay in touch with you. And so probably the best suggestion is just sign up for our newsletters, because I do try to send those out on a more or less regular basis. And then in each one of them are my email and all the other ways of getting in touch with me.
I would just say beer and Twitter don't mix well, and I'm not giving up beer.
Yeah, there's an honest answer right there. Excellent. Okay, and so we got time for one more question. This was someone who didn't leave their name, but they did submit through the survey sent out earlier this week. Just wanted to know what they can do to help you on helping you pass the legislation you're working on these last few weeks of session.
So I can start. I would just say I would welcome, again, a lot of what I'm working on is in the lanes of kind of mental health related, substance use disorder, criminal legal system reform. I'm certainly happy to help any constituent at all with any passions of theirs and help them figure out where to get plugged in. But if the areas that I just mentioned are of interest to anyone, please shoot me a note. Our emails are all the same, first name dot last name at leg.wa.gov. But please reach out, and I would be more than happy to meet and strategize and mind meld about what I'm working on, or frankly, and especially about topics of interest to any constituent. So please reach out anytime, and would love to work together to create a better Washington.
I guess I would say that for bills that legislators are undecided on, I think the question is, what are they thinking about struggling with, where information or your personal experience could help them make a decision on. Some of the most persuasive emails to me that have got me to vote a certain way were just really well thought out, clear, logical ideas based on personal experiences of my constituents, and I always really appreciate that. There's always passions on both sides of an issue, but if you can really lay it out and help us understand, and we deal with a lot of weighty topics, we worry about it, we want to get it right, and so just helping us get it right is great. Appreciated.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when I am presiding over a committee hearing, and one particular bill had 1,400 people who signed in. Fortunately, not all of them wanted to speak. Only 46 of them wanted to testify, which was manageable. So I think those personal stories that are also practical and appropriate for that particular bill is very helpful. And also, especially if you can, if you have criticism for that bill, then what are your practical suggestions that can add to the bill? Those are the most, I think, helpful way of helping a bill move along. So definitely do get engaged and look up a bill that you might be interested in, or that you might be an interested party in. And I guess the silver lining for this COVID-19 has been that this year we opened up testimony and the hearings to virtual participation. And so we were hearing from so many people throughout the whole state. So please do stay engaged.
Great, thank you for those answers. That is unfortunately all the time we have for tonight's event. If we didn't get to your question tonight, you can reach out to your lawmakers with information that I'll put up here on the screen and here in just a minute. Have their email addresses up here that you can reach out to them afterwards. I do want to give a special thank you to the folks who are helping us with tonight's event. Fanny and Rani are helping us with the Spanish language broadcast over on another channel. And we also have Mike and Ann helping us with the ASL interpretation tonight. So thank you very much for helping us out. With that, I will turn it over to the lawmakers for some brief closing remarks.
I'll just say a huge thanks to everybody for joining. This is the best part of our job, to engage with constituents in any format. So please reach out anytime. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're on mute, Representative Ryu.
Oh, sorry about that. So every time you have to say that, apparently a little kitten dies somewhere. But anyway, so thank you so very much for your time. And as you can tell, we enjoy serving individually as well as with each other. So really looking forward to being able to meet in person. But in the meantime, please do reach out to each one of us.
I want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to ask us questions, to inform us of what you're thinking about, to get better informed yourselves. This job, this is so much more than a job. I just don't know what other word to use. This position that we have really makes me fundamentally understand what public service and to some extent sacrifice truly means. There is so much opportunity to do good, but also a need to get it right. Because if we get it wrong, people get hurt. And so this, I just find like this just fits so well with sort of my life's goals to be of service. And I just want to thank you for empowering me, whether you voted for me or not. I just want to thank you so much for being engaged and being here. Thank you.